guys, this is Katie. So today I'm going to be starting with a little bit of colour. I realise a lot of my videos are kind of charcoal drawings, so I wanted to introduce you to how I paint in Procreate, how I think about colour, and I hope this is useful. So the exercise we're doing today is a restricted colour palette. And I'm really taking inspiration from a guy called Zorn, who is a famous painter and a contemporary back around the time of Sargent. So this is Zorn here. When we say a restricted palette, we mean a restricted number of colours or oil paints. The benefit of using a restricted palette is it makes it a little bit more simple to mix colours because you don't have many menu options to choose from. Really, the restricted palette that Zorn uses only has 4 colours. I mean, if you're counting white as a colour, which many don't. So it is a very restricted number of colours. So it makes it easier to mix colours. It also means that the colours you do mix are a lot more harmonious because you're just not trying to kind of bring in too many different colours, and because you only use these 4, the colours you can mix are often, they kind of sync with each other. So the 4 colours that Zorn used is red. So this is a very chromatic red. I think he uses cadmium red, but I mean there's other various versions that kind of have a similar kind of slightly warm, very strong red colour. A yellow, this is one, it's a bit like a yellow ochre, so it's kind of a slightly dirty yellow, quite a muted yellow, a white and a black. So with those 4 colours, you know, this is a painting he did, this is a self-portrait that he's produced using those 4 colours. Sargent often uses a very similar palette, so actually you can get a really good range of skin tones, which is why it's quite popular for drawing portraits. Today I'm going to be doing a master study of this painting by Sargent. How we replicate this approach using digital medium is we really want to restrict the colour slider through to the yellow. So we don't really want to go past this kind of point. We don't want to really edge into the greens all the way down to the red, and perhaps not even to kind of the bright red. So we're using a very narrow colour range here. The first question I had when I was first introduced to this palette is how on earth can I get the blues I see, the greens, the purples, how can I do that with just this tiny little range if I can't slide over here to those colours? And the way that you really have to think about it mentally is almost substitute in your brain the black for the blue. So what I mean by that is if you want to get a green, what you want to do then is have a very move to your yellows, but actually remove a lot of the chroma. So if I want to have a green in the face, I'll move over to the yellow section, but instead of taking yellow from over here, I will move towards the desaturated yellows over here, and then I will use that instead of my greens, which sounds a little bit odd, but actually once you start working with it, you realize it makes sense. So that kind of desaturated yellow I'll use for my greens. The same for the purples, I'll use a desaturated red for my purples. If I want a lilac, so kind of a light purple, I'll use a desaturated pink. And for the light greens, a desaturated yellow. So maybe these don't look like very strong colours, but what you find is once you put those alongside the stronger oranges, the stronger pinks, then in comparison these do look even more kind of green and purple. So you get the same kind of range that you'd like to expect to see on the human face. And actually on the human face, when you see a green, you're not really seeing a green. You're not seeing like the green that you see on a tree. You are just seeing a desaturated yellow. So I think just thinking of colours that way just really helps. It might not make so much sense now, but I think once you start going with the exercise, you realise the power of, you know, having these only just these few colours and actually trying to produce paintings from these 4 colours or 3 colours. So yes, the portrait we're doing on the left. So first stage is you want to start off very small. This really helps with the overall tones. So obviously the background is black, so I think we'll just shortcut ourselves here and just block in the background. And then we want to move to the face. So there's a few areas of the face. I think this is kind of exaggerated. Often you hear like the colour planes of the face, so the forehead is often slightly yellowy, the area around the eyes, the nose, the ears, where they get the most blood flow, is more pink, and the bottom of the chin, especially on men, is more kind of grey coloured. And you're seeing that to some extent here. What I would suggest is pick kind of an average tone of the face. What I mean by average tone is, I mean, if you're really to squint your eyes as much as you can and pick a colour that's closest or the most average colour of the whole face, then that's kind of what I mean here. So the average colour I'm seeing is maybe, and again I could go for the cooler colour or the warmer colour, but maybe one of the colours I see around the cheeks here. So perhaps this kind of colour. Maybe I'll bring it a little bit warm. It's quite difficult to say. I mean, you're probably not going to get it right first time, to be honest. But that's fine. I think as long as you get it close enough, then you can just pivot from that colour and you'll end up with something quite convincing. The brush I'm using is from Aaron Griffin Art's brush set, his Procreate brush set. It's free to download. It's donation only, so it's a good brush set. So if you can afford to make some donation, then go ahead. And if you can't, yes, it's a free download and it's something I highly recommend. So I'm using the heavy jitter brush. I'm setting it not too big, not too small. Getting my canvases side by side. This is kind of how Sargent painted. He used the slight size method. And then what I'll do is I will just try and replicate the shape that I see on the left hand side roughly. I'll make it bigger actually. The great thing about this brush is the harder you press, the more opaque the brush gets and the more the colour jitters. So you can see as I'm painting, let me just zoom out, the brush stroke has all these different kind of jittering colours in it, and it just makes it look a little bit more realistic. Because real life oil painting, when someone's painted with a brush, that brush stroke is textured, so it catches the light in different ways, so it would have a similar effect. So I just find that quite a nice way of painting, to be honest. Yeah, so I'm just trying to copy what I see on the left hand side. It's not perfect. I actually made it a little bit too big, so I'm just gonna bump it down a bit. Maybe rotate it a little bit. You can see I'm painting all on one layer. It's up to you. I mean, sometimes I keep the background on a different layer, but I think when Sargent was painting, he didn't have the luxury of, putting some of his painting on a different layer and magically stopping it from blending. I think a lot of the beauty of what he does is stuff does blend together. So yeah. It's quite a simple painting, which is why I chose it. I mean, obviously it's not just the head. This is kind of a selection of the full painting, but yeah, I mean, it's quite a good one just to get started on as a quick study. Master copies are I found so helpful in learning to improve my oil painting and my digital work. So yeah, I can't highly recommend them enough. Okay, so let's just add in a bit of hair. So it's not the best photo on the left hand side, but it looks like it might be brown. So again, for browns, brown is kind of a desaturated orange, I would say. So you've got to ask yourself, like, how cool is your brown? And if it's cooler, you head towards the left hand side. And how warm? And then sometimes it's kind of slightly more greeny brown or a slightly more purpley brown. And then the greeny brown, you head towards the yellow. The purpley brown, you head towards the red. I think it's a slightly more greeny brown and it's quite cool, so I'm going to go there. Again, you know, we can fix it on the fly. And he's got some highlights there. Now, one thing you can do is if you're struggling to choose the colours, you can actually add in the original photo and colour pick. What I would say is don't colour pick mindlessly. When you do select a colour, like you're struggling to see the colour on his face, hold it down and select. And then you want to like have a look and see where it is. Like, you know, some of those yellows, are they really yellow? So I've picked that pink. I mean, obviously it's pink. It's up here, somewhere in the mid-range. But some of the colours that you might see as green or yellow, let's pick a green. So how about this one? So his eyes look blue, right? Let's see if this is actually blue. Oh, they're kind of blue, but they're actually more yellow than blue. So what we've got here is a very cool grey. And they've done that. We've done that by heading over to the yellow section. So actually you can get the same effect just by, you know, picking a very desaturated green over here. And how about some purples? Let's have a look. Yeah, it's actually quite a red colour, you know, it's almost a brown. So I think sometimes a lot of the colour that we see is just, the colour is just a comparison to the colours around it. So something you might think is a grey or a purple, well actually that's on the blue, but I mean you get the same effect by actually shoving it over here. So yeah, so I mean if you're struggling then you can colour pick from here, but like I say, don't do it mindlessly. You know, you just select the colour, look and say, does that make sense? You know, why is it here? Why, you know, how have we got that colour? You know, how much red, how much yellow, how much white, how much black have we used to get to that colour? And I think having that structure for when you paint really helps. So let's go back to our painting. So I'm squinting my eyes, I'm looking left and right. At the moment, it looks pretty basic. Let's try and, so this is how Sargent painted. He really wanted to get the shape of the head first before he added the features in. So let's see if we can take the same approach and take this kind of very 2D ugly shape and make it 3D. So the forehead I'm seeing is a little bit more yellow. Let's put that in. Ooh, on the right layer. That's perhaps even slightly too light. We don't want to go too light to start off with. We want to be able to, you know, we want to work in the mid-tones and be able to add the other features on afterwards. So then he's got some purple down the side of his face. So we're going back to those kind of pinks, but we're desaturating it, we're greying it down. So we can add that in around the side of his face. And around the left hand side of his face it's quite desaturated as well, maybe even slightly more purpley. Slightly more neutral. Let's add that in. And you're probably not going to get it right first time. It might take, you know, a little while. But I need to get a new screen protector. Yeah. Again, squinting my eyes, trying to get as close as possible. So down here it's slightly more yellowy, I think. And that's again because I'm no longer around his eyes. I've kind of moved down to his chin where there's less blood flow. I know mentally there's going to be less. Yeah, it's going to be less red there, so it's going to head towards some more of the greys. And then under his chin is really quite dark. It's almost purpley. So let's like head a little bit over here again. See if we can get that chin in. Sargent painted outside the lines. He let his colours blend into each other, so he painted the background into the face and the face into the background. So we'll do a little bit of that. I'm trying not to be lazy. If I want a mid-tone, I'm trying not to use the brush opaquely. I'm trying to mix or select the right colour for that mid-tone and apply it with a quite heavy hand. So yeah, I want to use this, all the colours quite opaquely. So around his head, we want kind of a greeny beige. Let's add that in, again slightly warmer. So I think the colours, the questions you want to ask yourself constantly is it warmer, is it cooler, is it darker, is it lighter? I think often just by asking yourself those questions you can get the majority of it correct. Right, so let's have a little look. So Sargent has some quite deep, saturated colours around the nose, so it almost looks like a very deep red, like this kind of colour. So let's just add that in. I mean, it's probably not right, it's probably not in the right place. But if we're using a heavy hand, we can kind of fix anything. Again, around the nose, it's not quite as red, it's slightly more greeny. It's still pretty saturated. Let's go there. See where we get. You can see that's not quite right. So this is kind of what I do when I oil paint, to be honest. I mix the colour, I look at the colour, I mix the colour, I apply the colour, and if it's not right, I fix the colour. As the light's coming from the upper right hand side, so anything that's lit by the light, the colours are quite true, but as you move around the edges, the light becomes more desaturated. So I can see here, although this looks like a very similar colour to here, it should actually be more kind of towards the grey, towards the left hand side, because it's moving away from the viewer. It really is quite grey around the top side here. So let me add that in. Some black. I do a bit of colour picking for colours I've already mixed. I mean, I've mixed them before, so I know I can get them again. I think mostly it's just, I don't want to interrupt my flow, but sometimes it takes longer to do that than it does to actually just choose a colour. So yeah, otherwise I don't help myself by doing that. So I want to be a bit more over here. Yeah, that looks about right. I'm not going to do the eye sockets yet. Well, I'm going to do the ball of the eye, but I'm not actually going to do the eyeball. The ball of the eye, but not the eyeball. Does that even make sense? I'm going to do the eye socket, but not the eyeball. There you go. That's what I mean. I'm just trying to match the tones as much as possible. And with this, you're constantly drawing, so, you know, it's okay to get it wrong. I'm pretty sure all of this is going to get drawn over again at some point. And actually, it looks better when you're drawing into your paint over and again, because then the colours do kind of mix. I mean, as long as, if you're not applying, like, you know, the heaviest pressure you possibly can at all times, which you're not, then your colours are going to mix, and you're going to have these kind of colours are going to start bouncing off each other and harmonising. Right, the mouth is something I always struggle with. Sargent was the best at mouth. He did the really kind of nice and understated. So I'm looking at this colour here and I'm looking over there and I'm just kind of bouncing between the two. Actually, I think it's a little bit brighter. Maybe slightly more orange. No. Let's just see. Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm going to go in and do all this area. Highlights are something I'm going to add later, I think. I'm looking at the lines, the distance between the shapes. Oh, that's such a nice grey down there. Like, it's a really kind of neutral grey. It almost looks like the grey I've got up here. Let's have a look. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's have a look. So I'm seeing like a shape like this. I'm just trying to replicate that. This is how I try and paint in oils. I mix the colour I see. I look at the shape of that colour on the page, and then I just try and replicate that as much as I can. I'm not worried too much about edges at the moment, whether the edges are blending into each other or not. I think a lot of that will come out when I start refining. So for right now, it's mostly about getting the right colours. Now down there, that looks almost green, so let's go like a really dark yellow. Oh, not dark enough. There's some dark green around here. That looks quite green. That looks quite green. Side of his chin. You can see when you're painting it, I'm going to say about edges, there's some where you've got a very kind of definite edge there, but then there's some where there's no edge at all and it kind of almost fades into each other. Again, I can get some of that with a brush, like if I start using the brush quite lightly, it goes quite transparent. So I'm not worrying too much about that right now. I think right now the focus is getting all the colours correct. There's a grey where the eyebrow's turning. Let's put that in there. It's actually a bit lighter. I find it helpful to go diagonally when I mix a colour. So if I've picked a colour here and it's not quite right, I ask myself, does it need to be cooler or more saturated and lighter and darker? And usually it's, if it looks wrong, it's because there's two things that are wrong. So it's not usually just the saturation, it's usually the hue as well. So I find if I decide what diagonal direction I want to go in, that's a better result. So let's say I put this colour down here. Well, actually that's pretty close. So possibly a bad example, but let's say I was aiming for this colour here. It's too dark and it's too desaturated, so I need to go, whoops, I need to go to the right and actually need to kind of bump it a bit more pinky as well. So the hue is slightly off, but the hue is less important, I think. The chroma, sorry, that, you know, the colour on the slider is less important. The most important thing is actually just on this one screen. So does it need to be stronger chroma or does it need to be in a different value? And let's get that beard in, it's bothering me. I think a little bit more brown. So again, you can see how it went diagonally there. in the habit of doing that. It's really quite grey on the middle section here. And then on this corner of his lip, it's quite saturated. Let's just stick that in. I'm really looking to see when the colours kind of disappear into each other. I don't believe Sargent really mixed on the canvas or blended on the canvas at all. So a lot of his transitions where colours move from one to the other is just done by mixing the colour and just using, you know, the control that he has of the brush to kind of blend the colours in together. We get a certain amount of that to some extent with this, like depending on how much pressure I use. The more pressure is like applying a big thick dollop of paint. Less pressure is like maybe a little bit of paint applied quite lightly with a soft brush, so the colours kind of blend together a little bit. So I think when I do digital, I constantly like have in the back of my head how I would manage that in a traditional medium, which I think is why I find it so helpful for my practice. Really quite grey under here, look. And you see that the photo I'm working from is really bad quality, but I think to some extent that doesn't really matter. You still get an overall, I mean, and that's why Sargent's so great. I mean, when you get close up, it looks like a mess anyway, so. Right, let's have a look. So his chin anyway, it looks quite saturated and pink, but that's because it's surrounded by a lot of dark colours. So it's important that you compare one area to another, and actually that's quite similar colour to there, I think, unless my eyes are tricking me. But this area here is quite grey. So let's have a look. Yeah. Getting a little bit. One of the best things I learned with like painting this alla prima style is not to get too attached to your original drawing. Don't be afraid to paint it over. I think where I've made mistakes in the past is I've got too attached to the drawing, and that's almost like when I do a great drawing, I'm like, oh gosh, like what have I done? Because I'm not going to want to paint over that. Yeah, so you didn't get comfortable with fixing things as you go. Right, let's make this ear, it's quite purpley red. Bring it this way a bit. It's like a bad photo, like his ear, the bottom of his ear looks quite desaturated, but I don't think he meant for that, so I don't know if there's something wrong with the photograph. It doesn't really make sense to me mentally, so I'm gonna ignore that. He's got quite a grey area here. Let's have a look how we're getting on. So I'm mostly happy. So we got to remember the centre line of the face. I think one mistake I do quite a lot is I get the lips kind of off centre. So here I'm just selecting this colour, and so I know where I am right now, and then I'm fixing it. So it needs to be more towards the yellow, and it needs to be more desaturated. Still too light. Let's go down that way. I often find myself exaggerating things in digital. But it usually works out for me, so I just go with it. So you can probably expect a more kind of exaggerated version of this painting in my digital. Right, let's get the corner of his nose. So it's like kind of the same saturation as lips, but it's a little bit more towards the yellows. Maybe not quite that much. And his nose here, oh, it's a very nice colour, kind of very strong, peachy colour. Often it's nice to have more saturated colours around the nose, because then you can get really that specular highlight on the end of the nose, just so. I think one thing you find with oil paints is it's easier to grey things down, but it can be quite hard to take a grey colour and kind of really add back in this kind of strong colour afterwards. So I think it's better to start almost too bright rather than too dull and fix it afterwards. Because, I mean, you're not going to get it right. Unless you're very lucky, you're not going to get it right. So I think you need to decide whether you want to be accidentally too bright or accidentally too dull. And I would definitely advocate for being accidentally too dull. Accidentally too bright if possible. So we've got like, this obviously is a hard note here. I think wherever you see anything jarring, you just need to look at the picture again and say, what do I need to fix? So here it's definitely too bright. I mean, it's bright around here, but then it's kind of moving to this grey colour. So let's have a look. So our yellow colour is there and our grey colour is here. So to get an in-between tone, we want to move to somewhere in the middle between those 2 points. So I think it's actually a little bit darker, so let's try that. Let's go a bit brighter, a bit pinker. It's really quite green there, but I do like the colour. I'm going to put it down here somewhere, I think. I think that's probably not warm enough because you get so much blood flow around here. Now I've made this really quite bright, but I've made it too bright, I think. So let me just fix his lip. And let's pick dull that down a bit. That looks better, doesn't it? The problem is you've kind of got to let your eyes fly around the canvas a bit, or the palette, because if you stare at an area for too long, your eyes get used to it. So let's say I was just painting this area for ages, I might decide that this colour here is actually quite light if I'm just comparing it to the darker tones around it, but actually it is quite dark, and perhaps even darker than I've got here. So I think what even painting digitally does is it lets you get used to like techniques that you can use to stop yourself from making these errors. So now I've done that, I realise that this area here is too light, so let's just pick this up. So I think it needs to be a bit more purple and a bit more dark, so let's go diagonally down in that direction. Still not enough. Let's go again, and that's better. Now I want this to be even. saturated. Get that in there. So I think I'm going to speed up the video now. I've been drawing a little time. I think you get the idea. So obviously I've done what I always do. I've forgotten the eye. Not forgotten it, selectively ignored it. I'm just trying to get used to all the tones that I'm seeing here. So not forgetting to zoom out a little bit, you know, look left and right. So I'm pretty happy that it's quite accurate. You really want to, I know I was doing a little bit of refining, you really want to avoid refining quite yet, because what you'll find is it's really not accurate yet. So yeah, avoid refining. I think I've got that nostril in the wrong place. Once you've got the main colours in the right place, then it becomes a little bit easier to refine, because I mean I cheat a little bit, so I match the colour and I fix things. I say it's cheating, but I don't think it's really cheating, because that's exactly the same as what I do in oil painting. Like once I've got the colours in the right place, it's a lot easier to see what you're looking at and to fix it. So I don't think we should be too obsessed about getting the right shapes now. I mean, obviously you don't want to, when you're painting in real life, you don't want to put you don't want to put too much of the wrong colour paint in the wrong place, because unlike digital, like it's kind of always there, and it will always often, unless you wait for it to all dry, it will often mix with the other paints and kind of create a bit of a muddy mess. So I think right now I just suggest, like, it's going to look ugly, we're tiling, we want to get the right colours in the right places. You even maybe want to exaggerate some of the sections where, you know, stuff's quite similar in tone. I think what I've done is I've got this bit here too light. Let's just darken that up, that might make it easier. There we go. So yeah, we're just working our way around. I'm going to do figure out some of the things, and you can see it looks a bit cut out in places. Like I really want to get in and kind of do those transitions, but I think we don't want to over focus on that yet, so really try and like hold yourself back from, you know, doing what you do with the brush, which is going and fiddling and kind of fixing the transitions. I think we really need to, as much as you can, focus on getting the right colour paint in the right places, and the rest will kind of flow from there. And like I say, it doesn't need to be exactly the right colour. I think ideally it wants to be the right tone, but you'll find that once you get it mostly right, it will be a lot easier for you to kind of figure out what you need to fix. So yeah, so that's what I've got to at the moment. I'm just going to stop talking for a while and carry on working on this for a little while longer, and we'll see where we get to. See this reflected light here? It's very beautiful. The white is reflecting under this guy's chin. This is the thing I like about master studies, like you don't realise some of the subtleties until you, like some of the clever things that are happening until you try and reproduce it. And you're like, oh, I never saw that before. But I believe they're things that we recognise on a subconscious level. You see, I've not really drawn this at all. I'm just constantly flicking my eyes left to right. But because the colour blocks are so basic, it's incredibly easy to fix things. This is kind of the alla prima style really. So it's not about making a drawing and colouring it in. It's about looking at blocks of shape and colour. Once you can do that, once you realise that, it's just such a fun way to work. I must say that I think digital is so good for this because you can work at this scale like this. This is kind of how Sargent worked. So he'd walk back from the easel, he'd put the model next to the painting, and he would be walking backwards and forwards. So he could get this view here. Now I can see there's something not quite right with my drawing. So let's just do some measurements, shall we? So inner eye is, so I think the problem is I don't have the nose coming down far enough because it always points to his middle lip and his eye. Maybe I'm not helping myself by not having the eye there, but oh well. So I've got the colours in the right places. I'm not stressing about redrawing because I'm not drawing it. I'm just changing the shapes that I have drawn very slightly by moving their borders. And it's not even like all painting. I don't even have to remix the colour. I can just pick the colour I've already got. I mean, as a challenge, you could try and say, can I match that colour there? That's a fun challenge. So it's kind of pinky, maybe there. Let's have a look. Oh no, wrong. It needs to be grayer, I think. There you go. So it's kind of a, yeah, you can really choose a colour. I think the hardest thing is just getting the colours down in the first place. It's quite easy to take a colour and look at it and say, does it need to be slightly more pink or grey once it's already there. Not too much. So it looks a mess, right? I don't think I've done particularly well on this one. I don't know if it's because I've been talking, but let's do our overlay and see how we're getting on. Usually I just wouldn't do this, to be honest, but I think it might be an interesting exercise. So I'm going to set the transparency of my drawing down, and I'm going to try and position it on top of my existing drawing. So I can see just how wrong I got it. It's mostly right, let's have a look. So, you know what? It's not as bad as I thought. Oh, maybe it is. So what have I done wrong? I think most of it's just modelling. Like you carry on nudging the face and you get there eventually. This is why some of these drawings can take quite a long time. Because you're just going in and fixing stuff. So a lot of it's like you do one thing wrong and it just kind of snowballs. Like I didn't get that the nose further enough along, so then the chin wasn't further enough along. Back of his neck, I can see that now, it's obviously too wrong. He's lipping along a bit. I've actually forgotten what I saw, but oh yeah, his nose needs to be further down. Right, I hope I fast forward a lot of this when I'm editing this video. It's really boring. So So I'm gonna be quiet for a bit and carry on this drawing and see if I can get it up to a level of finish that looks good. have this much bother getting things right. I don't know if it's just the unusual angle. I don't know if something is wrong that's throwing everything else off. You're probably shouting at me now over the screen. I'm sure I'll figure it out later, but yeah, I'm kind of struggling. As you can see, I do the eyes quite late on. I don't know if it's because I find it quite difficult to locate the eye sockets in the face. But for me, the eyes don't make sense until the face is right. So I try and get the face right first, before I bother with eye sockets. At least eyeballs anyway, sorry. You say eye sockets, I kind of mean eyeballs. I think it's this eye here that's throwing me off. Let's see if I work my way in. But Sargent makes the faces a little bit like exaggeratedly wonky. So yeah, I'm blaming Sargent, not myself, but I think that gives them their kind of character. It also makes him quite hard to draw because he knows the exact perfect amount of how much to push it. Let's have a look. Just up to there. It might be the modelling of the head. I think his forehead's wrong. I think his eyeball's wrong. It's times like this I'm glad I'm doing it in digital. If I got it this wrong in oil paint, then it would be a right mess. But then Sargent would often sketch it out in charcoal first, at least to get the big shapes in the right place. Drawing from life there is super hard. People move. Even a tiny shift in a person's face just completely changes everything. So yeah, it's pretty tough. Still looks a bit weird. Fix his hairline. I think this is what's bothering me. It's purpley. Oh my goodness. Oh. Yeah, I could easily have cheated. Not cheated. It's not cheated. I could have easily taken shortcuts there, but this painful wrangling is how you get better, honestly. So now things are mostly in the right place. I'm kind of moving to the refining phase. I'm looking at the direction of his brush strokes and trying to replicate that. I mean, obviously it's still very, very blocky, ugly, but compared to where it was a little while ago, not too bad. See like the lines of the brush stroke, so it's really giving you like a little guide as to how to navigate around this face. I'm really trying to bounce around a lot. So we're not applying the same colour over and over again in one section. We're looking to see like what the colour vibration is. Where is it? Where are the paint strokes going? Are they going towards the yellows? It's like a little bit of orange. It's a bit like yellowy grey. Really picking that up in the colours you choose. Now the first time I saw someone doing this on a tutorial, I was like, how the heck are they doing that? How are they like bouncing around and making something that looks okay? If you're not there yet, don't worry, it'll come. I'm not even sure I'm there yet, but you know, I'm working on it. And the weirdest, or one of the weirdest, most fascinating things I find about this is you can be up here and see all these amazing colours and be really digging it. And then you can zoom out and be like, oh, they're all gone. They just blur it together. You know, they disappear. So don't worry if it looks a bit funky up close. As long as, you know, when you zoom out, as long as it makes sense as a picture, you're doing a good job. I think this is where you can do these sweeps. So maybe start hard and then whoosh, flick it. Because then you end up with kind of what Sargent had, which is like this variety of brush stroke where you start quite crisp and then it moves to something quite blended. But it's not really blended, as in he's not scrubbing at his canvas, he's controlling his brush. He's managing the transitions, you know, the changes between the different colours by applying perhaps a very thoughtful level of pressure, maybe. And the great thing about this is it's trial and error, so by experimenting, by getting it wrong, you're learning. You just need to do it quite mindfully if you can. It's easy to get in this like mode where you're just trying something and if it doesn't work, you're trying something else. And that's kind of what we want, but we don't want it to be completely mindless. You know what, this is the most therapeutic thing at the stage, I think, when you're just kind of playing. You're like, what is that colour? Did I put it down as grey? But is it really grey? Or it's like a saturated kind of purpley colour with a little bit grey next to it. And is that grey next to it, or is it just slightly desaturated version of that colour? What is even grey? It's desaturated colour. This is what happens to my brain. Often I'll kind of decide, be like, oh, is there colour nearby? Which is, if the colour is not quite right, I look around to say, well, which colour nearby do I think is right? And then I might pick up that colour, or I might try and mix that colour. I say mix. Pick it rather than use the eyedropper. I love, like, when I get into the darks, I love like moving down here in the colours. Get these really like saturated darks. So nice. On there. So I'm getting quite close to the end of this session. I think my iPad's going to run out of battery quite soon. Yeah, I hope you found this useful. I know it's been a bit kind of random, but I think this one's quite difficult to explain, this technique. But I found it so helpful. Such a good practice. If you think you might want to transition over to doing some oil painting at some point, you know, as a digital artist, or maybe you're already an oil painter and you just want to see if there's some like ways you can use digital art. think I'm going to leave it there for now. I could keep going on and on this, and I probably will. So hopefully you've seen what I've been doing. I know I've not always been talking, but it's about just refining, really. I've tried very hard not to let the opacity of the brush do too much of the work. I'm trying to mix the colours and use the brush with quite a lot of pressure, so that I'm not I guess I'm not using the natural blending of the brush too much, because I think that really does not have such a good look as actually just taking the time to layer brush strokes one over the other in the correct colour. So yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, is it? But it's cool. You can really see when you're getting close just how much different colours are going on. I've purposely been quite selective in my colours. I've tried to look and exaggerate shifts in colours in the painting as much as possible. When you get very close, you can see all those different colours, but then when you zoom out, it kind of all sings a little bit more. So again, it's not a Sargent, let's be honest. It doesn't matter how much I practice, I'm never going to be Sargent, but I'd like to think it has something of this painting. And most of all, it's been a pretty fun exercise that I've really enjoyed. Yeah, I could just sit on the sofa with the TV on doing this for ages. But it would be quite boring to watch and very boring for me to edit that if I did record the whole process. So I hope you find this interesting. I hope if you've never painted in this way that you give it a go. I'm sure that if you do, and if you do stick with it, you'll see some of the benefits that I see in just producing pretty cool paintings.